The indifference of consciousness to metaphysical questions, questions that have by no means been laid to rest by satisfaction in this world, is hardly a matter of indifference to metaphysics itself, however. Hidden in it is a horror that would take men's breath away if they did not repress it. We might be tempted to speculate anthropologically whether the turn in evolutionary history that gave the human species its open consciousness and thus an awareness of death, whether this turn does not contradict a continuing animal constitution which prohibits men to bear that consciousness. The price to be paid for the possibility to go on living would be a restriction of consciousness, then a means to shield it from what consciousness is, after all, the consciousness of death. It is a hopeless perspective that biologically, so to speak, the obtuseness of all ideologues might be due to a necessity of self-preservation, and that the right arrangement of society would by no means have to make it disappear, although of course it is only in the right society that chances for the right life will arise. The present society still tells us lies about death not having to be feared, and it sabotages any reflection upon it. Schopenhauer, the pessimist, was struck by the fact how little men in media vita are apt to bother with death. Like Heidegger 100 years later, Schopenhauer read this indifference in human nature rather than in men as products of history. Both of them came to regard the lack of metaphysical sense as a metaphysical phenomenon. In any case, it is a measure of the depth reached by neutralization and existential of the bourgeois consciousness. This depth makes us doubt whether, as has been drilled into the mind by a romantic tradition that survived all romanticism, things were so very different in times allegedly steeped in metaphysics, in the times which the young Lukács called replete with meaning. The tradition carries a paralogism with it. The truth of metaphysical views is not assured by their collective obligatoriness, by the power they exert over life in closed cultures. Rather, the possibility of metaphysical experience is akin to the possibility of freedom, and it takes an unfolded subject, one that has torn the bonds advertised as salutary, to be capable of freedom, the dull captive of socially authorized views. On allegedly blessed times, on the other hand, is related to the positivistic believer of facts. The ego must have been historically strengthened if, beyond the immediacy of the reality principle, it is to conceive the idea of what is more than entity. An order that shuts itself up on its own meaning will shut itself away from the possibility above order. Vis-a-vis theology, metaphysics is not just a historically later stage, as it is according to positivistic doctrine. It is not only theology secularized into a concept. It preserves theology in its critique, by uncovering the possibility of what theology may force upon men and thus desecrate. The cosmos of the spirit was exploded by the forces it had bound. It received its just deserts. The autonomous Beethoven is more metaphysical and therefore more true than Bach's Ordo. Subjectively liberated experience and metaphysical experience converge in humanity, even in an age when they fall silent. Great works of art express hope more powerfully than the traditional theological texts, and any such expression is configurative with that of the human side, nowhere as unequivocally as in moments of Beethoven. Signs that not everything is futile come from sympathy with the human, from the self-reflection of the subject's natural side. It is only in experiencing its own naturalness that genius soars above nature. What remains venerable about Kant is that in his theory of the intelligible, he registered the constellation of the human and the transcendent as no philosopher beside him. Before humanity opened its eyes, the objective pressure of the miseries of life made men exhaust themselves and their neighbor's shame, and the immanence of meaning in life is the cover of their imprisonment. Ever since there appeared something like organized society, a solidly built autarkic context, the urge to leave it has been weak. A child who has not been prepared already could not help noticing in his Protestant hymn book how poor and tenuous the part entitled "The Last Things" is in comparison with all the training exercises for what the faithful should believe and how they ought to behave. That magic and superstition might continue to flourish in religions has long been suspected, and the reverse of that suspicion is that the core, the hope for a beyond, was hardly ever so important to the positive religions as their content required. Metaphysical speculation unites with speculation in the philosophy of history. For the chance of the right consciousness even of those last things, it will trust nothing but a future without life's miseries. The curse of these miseries is that instead of spurring us beyond mere existence, they disguise existence and confirm it as a metaphysical authority. All is vanity. The word with which immanence has been endowed by great theologians ever since Solomon is too abstract to guide us beyond immanence. Where men are assured that their existence is a matter of indifference, they are not going to lodge any protest. As long as their attitude towards existence remains unchanged, the rest seems vain to them also. If one accuses entity of non-entity, without differentiation and without a perspective of possibility, he aids and abets the dull bustle. The bestiality with which such total practice amounts to is worse than the original bestiality. It comes to be a principle upon itself. The Capuchin sermon of the vanity of immanence secretly liquidates transcendence as well, for transcendence feeds on nothing but the experiences we have in immanence. But neutralization, profoundly sworn to that immanence, has survived even the catastrophes which, according to the clarion calls of the apologists, were to have thrown men back upon their radical concerns. For there has been no change in society's basic condition. The theology and metaphysics which necessity resurrected are condemned, despite some valiant Protestant resistance, to serve as ideological passports for conformism. No rebellion of mere consciousness will lead beyond that. In the minds of the subjects, too, a bourgeois society will choose total destruction, its objective potential, rather than rise to reflections that would threaten its basic stratum. The metaphysical interests of men would require that their material ones be fully looked after. While their material interests are shrouded from them, they live under Maya's veil. What is must be changeable if it is not to be all.